Well, hello. I guess I have no idea how to schedule. I have no clue how to schedule this deal. I tried to set it up for 8 a.m. exactly, and I know my clock in my car here is not accurate. Whose car has an accurate clock anyway? I think it's against the law to run your clock in your car with atomic precision. There's like a law against it or something. Speaking of law, we're going to talk about an excellent topic today. You'll see in the description. I'm just going to kind of, I don't know if anybody's going to roll in this morning. That's okay. Some people will catch it later. That's good too. You'll see in the description, or make it clear that this isn't meant to be formal. I'm not at the point in my life circumstantially to edit videos, to do studio level recordings or any of that. There's going to be interruptions. There's going to be glitchiness. And the fact of the matter is, unless you're recording and then submitting later, the whole nature of live streaming in general, very touchy. Even folks that have 100 meg internet, 300 meg internet, and then hypothetically gigabit, it's there's still hiccups. If you really think about the realm of history, we're still very much in the infancy of technology, the internet, communications on a global scale, all that. Very, very young. But that's not today's topic. Today's topic, and I have many that I'm saving, wanting to cover. I mentioned I'm going to be covering the idea of covert persecution in America. I think I'll do that one next. I don't know how soon I'll be doing that. But today, I'd like to talk about our ability to remain confident in the Bible as we have it. And by we, that is requiring defining. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and get into it. A little bit about my background. I have a biblical studies, biblical languages bachelor's, and my master's is not directly biblical studies. It's actually in clinical psychology, and that's not even my profession. I'll try and limit the wipers as much as I can there. Good old rainy day. I like rainy days. So anyway, I've been studying and learning biblical truth, biblical studies for 20 years. And I am I'm probably about as wise as a 20-year-old is regarding the nature of the world. You look at a 10-year-old and you're like, how much they really understand how the world works, world history, politics, just systems, all that kind of stuff. You look at a 10-year-old and you're like, I wouldn't rely on them for complete education. You look at a 20-year-old, you're like, I mean, a 20-year-old, if you put in good effort, 20-year-old could have pretty good grasp on the nature of things, the world, history, all that good stuff. But 20 years is 20 years. It sounds like a long time, but when it comes to topics that are both profoundly simple and profoundly infinite, there's going to be a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of a little ignorance, to put it bluntly. So you just there's only so much you can learn in a certain amount of time. So the Bible. What do I mean when I say the Bible? Well, for those of you that aren't already aware, the Bible is a word that indicates a book of books. And what are the books being referenced? It's a very important question. Protestants generally recognize a certain set of books, as you would find in an NIV, in an NASB, NASB, ESV, KJV. These are different initials for versions of the Bible. We've got the New International Version. You got the New American Standard Bible. Today, I can certainly touch on that very briefly here. You've got translations. We're referring to English translations. You've got translations that are literal translations. You've got translations that are figurative and or dynamic translations. You've got paraphrased versions of the Bible, like the Living Bible, it's a version, or there's one out there that's completely it's all paraphrased. Everything is rewritten in a paraphrased manner. You got to read a book like that, like a book written by a friend, something that has value, but shouldn't be taken to be perfect. Speaking of perfect, it's an interesting word that shows up a couple of times in the New Testament. So, again, here's a little bit more information for you, about a little background about the Bible. You've got Roman Catholics that take what we have, they added, as in they included, that's the better, more appropriate word, they included a certain set of extra books. And then you've got the Greek Orthodox that include even more books. You'll see a link in the description, the TLDR link. It will give you a little couple of minute description of what I just explained. Probably a lot more concisely and not accurately per se, but you get a better idea. Just watch that one. I also include a longer link, the Deepish dive link. Go check that out. It's about an hour and 6 minutes, an hour and 7 minutes, somewhere along that line. Highly recommend that. It was an excellent, it's a conversation, two guys, question answer lecture on the topic. I think they did a fantastic job touching on certain aspects of the topic. Highly recommend checking that video out. And there's a lot more resources regarding this topic. But I'm going to touch on some of the more important, not more important, it's the wrong way of saying that. Let's just say day-to-day life relevant aspects of what we need to know. Okay? You've got a really long history of the Bible. What I mean by that, it was written over a pretty long period of time. Some of the things you need to recognize about how the Bible was written from the get-go, whereas it's considered that it's possible that Job was the one of the first written works of the Bible. There's a question about that. It's whatever. Anyway, when you look at the history of the writing of the Bible, you have to recognize how things were so different than they are now. You could already assume they didn't have computers, obviously. You'd have to be a Generation Z cubed or something to not know that, but it's okay. So they had a different type of paper, right? Paper is a not modern development, but it was more new than when they started writing the Bible. So they start off with something called a reed. It's different than a quill. They started off writing on scrolls of papyrus. Okay, you can look up how that's made. You can look up its longevity. But you have to think about, just like paper or any other medium, it has a lifespan. So the more it gets used, the more it wears. That's just the nature of how things work. So you got papyrus scrolls, and that's just rolled paper. Rolled papyrus, whatever. It's a rolled up. Okay, it's not. You're not turning pages. You're got this long thing that's all rolled up, and the way that it's written is different. They call it the transition from scrolls to pages. Those are called codex because there's a certain order to it's required when you have pages. You have to identify the pages. So that's why the word codex is referred to. If you do any research on the topic, they are transitioning from one to the other. It's the word that they use. So just think about technologically what has to happen when you know that what you're writing down is not going to last forever, and when you know that what you're writing down is eternally important. There's complete evidence that the individuals that were writing this stuff down, the words of Scripture, they knew exactly that what they were writing down was important from the get-go. It wasn't like there's nothing in the Bible, no book of the Bible is accidental. Okay? None of it was written in such a way that it was discovered later and then became popular and adopted as Scripture. That's not the context in which it was written. That being said, we got some other interesting components of Scripture. I want you to consider this: the alphabet and the way that it was written. So you may be aware, you may not, that the Hebrew Bible is in the Old Testament. That was originally written without vowels. And you're like, well, goodness gracious. Well, that's not very good. How did they even know? How did you not mistake one word for another word? Well, then you don't understand the Hebrew language very well. The Hebrew language is very fascinating. To this modern day, vowels are not necessarily written. Go look up a movie box. Gosh, I'm old. A movie box. I'm like talking about Blockbuster style. Oh boy. Look up any Hebrew, guys. Just look up a news article or a Hebrew meme or anything. They make memes. They do. So I've got a t-shirt. I used to have a t-shirt. It was The Simpsons on it. Oddly enough, all the colors were inverted. Like Marge's hair was red instead of blue. It's really weird. Anyway, it said Mishpat Simpson, and I'm meant to go that way. Mishpat Simpson. Mishpat is family. But it just had Mem, Shin, Pei, Tav. I think it was Tav. So it's just those consonants, and it's a consonantal language, and the vowels are understood in the same way that we know instinctively how to pronounce a word. By habit, by certain norms, and our language is far more distorted and influenced than a language like Hebrew, that is among the first of all languages, if not the first. There are individuals that can confidently claim potentially that Hebrew was the first language. There are people that will argue that. I get it. It's not an important argument. It really isn't. So anyway, Hebrew is consonantal. The importance to this, I hate yellow lights, despise them. Ugh. Here's the importance of this. Because of that, you actually limit the number of potential transcription errors that can take place. Now, that wasn't intentional. It was just consequential. It was just a benefit of the system at the time. So it wasn't, and I mean, as I said, it's still part of the thing, but vowels were not included in writing until around 500 AD. We're like, 500 AD? Well, gosh, that's even after the New Testament. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So the Old Testament was for the life of all of the disciples, for Jesus. It's all consonantal. And there's some interesting things to consider here. You've got Jesus declaring, and that's probably the best word, that Scripture is, he's confident in Scripture. Let me just put it that way. Keep it as simple as possible. Completely confident in Scripture. Okay? And the disciples are as well. They write about it. as inspired by God, uh, adequate, sufficient, so on and so on. You got verses like 2 Timothy 3:16, of course. And there's more. All right, so here's the significant part of Jesus being confident and the disciples and Jews in general being completely confident in the scripture. Well, and that verse that I referenced, 2 Timothy 3:16, is an extreme controversial verse for Jewish people. And I'll explain why in a minute. So why is it significant that they would have been confident in Scripture then? Okay? You need to consider that it was no less than 400 years between the latest written book of the Old Testament, Malachi. Call it the silent years. That 400-year period between Malachi and the New Testament is called the silent years. Maccabean Wars took place during that time. A lot happened in that 400 years. It's the silent years in regards to Scripture. Okay? Do some study on that. It's very interesting. All the things that took place. So, but you got 400 years. What happens in 400 years? Well, you've got generations happening. Think about that. Just think about in 1 year's time, how many times, let's see my hand. How many times is somebody unrolling, unraveling? They use still mostly scrolls, but they at this point they might have had other volume. So we had papyrus, and then it went to volume, V-E-L-L, vellum. Maybe that's the right pronunciation. It's probably vellum, V-E-L-L-U-M. It's a different form of paper, medium for writing, whatever you want to call it. And then we had paper, which ironically we get the word paper from papyrus, but it's all good. So anyway, what you've got there, I want you to take into consideration, you have hundreds of years taking place, and you have generations turning over. You've got use of the Bible year after year after year, week after week after week, day after day after day. You know, just think, in 100 years, you have 36,000 days, 36,500 days just in 100 years. As I said, there will be interruptions. It's all good. All I'm saying is, in 400 years, you've got a lot going on to those Bibles. It's not the same Bible being used. It's not the same single scroll. By 400 BC, I'm not sure that they conceive how many copies of Scripture have happened up to that point at 400 BC. It's part of the lifestyle, right? Scribes were special people, okay? It wasn't every Joe Schmo or whatever that was just copying the Bible. These were people, if you want a, I don't know what in the world with my throat, sorry about that. If you want to think about it with a modern day analogy, think of a monk, Okay, think of somebody that's devoting their life to a single task, and that's the way that the scribes were. They were devoted people. They that was their role in life, was to copy and, in a lot of ways, memorize Scripture, which was not unique to their profession. You see, one of these days I'm gonna be all right. It's a really weird discomfort in my throat. It's affecting the sound of my voice. I don't like it. All right. So, memorization of Scripture was near universal among the Jews. It was how all the young children would learn to read. It was how they learned their story, how to read. They learned all the aspects of Scripture. They learned Scripture to learn. It's how they learned their alphabet. It's how they learned everything, was with Scripture. They weren't reading Aesop's fables, obviously. They weren't even reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, even when they were available. That there wasn't like extracurricular reading. I'm sure there was other writings that they had access to. That's not what I'm arguing here. What I am saying is that it's what was worthy of their earlier learning. Okay? But the scribes were a special group of individuals and a certain class of occupation that specifically devoted their lives to copying the Bible. And that's what they did over and over and over again. Okay? And there was lots of these guys constantly for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. How many? Speculation. It's hard to imagine how many there could be because of how many thousands of years have now passed and the number of scriptures that we still have. Just compared to any other writing that was carried down for years and years and years. Look at the percentage of writings that we know exist on the writings of Plato, the writings of Aristotle, the writings of Socrates, the Iliad and the Odyssey. How many copies do we have of that? Any historical writing, pick any of them, and you'll not find anything with more corroboration for truth and evidence of security. You can rest more securely and confidently in the accuracy of Scripture than any writing ever. Period. There are some reasons for that. There's the supernatural reasons that are, faith-based, but there are very many pragmatic reasons as well. Okay? So, all of that to say, by the time Jesus was born and he was learning the Scriptures as a young boy, what he was reading was so many generations of copy, of a 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 copy. Keep on going. I don't have enough time. I really don't. To say how many copy of a copy of a copy Jesus was 100% confident in. Well, what significance is that? The creator of the universe in human form told everyone that he was confident by nature of his use the scripture and no denouncing of the scripture. What did he denounce, though? Didn't Jesus denounce some things? Oh, he sure did. It's a good topic of discussion. So I wanted to talk about the controversy, speaking of. So I bring up a controversy to remind myself of another controversy. So 2 Timothy 3:16. Sometimes I'm not going to tell you the verse because I want you to go look it up. This is one of those instances. Why was this a controversial verse? It hinges on the word sufficient. Well, what's the difference between, let's just say, a Christian that uses the Old Testament and a Jewish person that uses the Old Testament? It's this question of sufficiency. And this is obviously an excellent link to this whole discussion of why we can be confident in the Bible as the Bible. This is one of those reasons why. So, the Jews, you get it. The Jews have something called the oral tradition. Okay? The rabbinical writings. And the Orthodox Jews that actually read the Bible and don't denounce God, because we have people that claim to be Jewish that aren't. But I'm referring to those who claim knowledge